November 12, 1942, a cold morning in the mountains of Tunisia. A German reconnaissance unit, part of the Africa Corps, crests a ridge and looks down into a valley where an American supply column has stopped to make repairs. The Germans watch through binoculars, counting vehicles, assessing strength. And then they see it. A small, open-topped vehicle, boxy and absurd-looking, no bigger than a civilian car, bouncing along the side of the column. The Germans laugh. One of them, a lieutenant named Hans Vogel, lowers his binoculars and says to his sergeant, "Look at their toys. No wonder they have no chance." The sergeant grins and says, "It looks like something a child would draw." They take photographs. They write it in their reports. The American Jeep, as it is apparently called, is evidence of everything they have been taught. The Americans are not serious. They do not understand war. They have sent boys with toys to fight men with machines. And for the next 6 months, this will be the prevailing opinion among German commanders. Right up until the moment they realize, too late, that the joke was on them. The Jeep was born out of desperation. In 1940, as the war in Europe exploded and America began to rearm, the U.S. Army issued a request for a light reconnaissance vehicle. The specifications were brutal. It had to weigh less than 1,300 pounds, go 50 miles per hour, climb steep grades, ford water, carry a crew and equipment, and be simple enough to manufacture by the thousands. 3 companies responded: Willys, Bantam, and Ford. They had weeks to deliver a prototype. Willys won the contract, but the design became a collaboration. A vehicle so simple, so utilitarian, that it seemed almost primitive. It had no doors, no roof, a flat windshield that folded down. It looked, to European eyes accustomed to the heavy, imposing machinery of the Wehrmacht, like a joke. But the joke had 4-wheel drive, a power-to-weight ratio unlike anything on the battlefield, and a design philosophy that would rewrite the rules of modern warfare. The Germans just did not know it yet. The first encounters were brief and lopsided. German units, equipped with half-tracks, armored cars, and motorcycles with sidecars, would spot American jeeps darting through the landscape and dismiss them as scout vehicles, ineffective, vulnerable. And they were vulnerable. No armor, no protection. But they were also fast. Faster than anything the Germans had. A jeep could accelerate to 50 miles per hour on flat ground and maintain 30 miles per hour over terrain that would bog down a half-track. It could take a hit from small arms fire, and if the engines still ran, it kept going. If it broke down, a crew could often fix it with basic tools in under an hour. Vogel, the lieutenant who had mocked the jeep in Tunisia, encountered one again in December during a skirmish near Tiburba. His unit set up an ambush on a road, expecting to catch American trucks. Instead, 3 jeeps came over the hill, saw the ambush and instantly reversed course, disappearing into the scrub at a speed that left the Germans standing in the road, confused and empty-handed. Vogel wrote in his diary, "They vanished like rabbits. I do not understand how something so small can move so fast." It was the first crack in the narrative. By January 1943, reports were filtering back to German command. The American Jeep was not a toy. It was everywhere. It carried supplies, towed artillery, evacuated wounded, scouted enemy positions, and moved with a speed and flexibility that German vehicles could not match. But the real revelation came in the mud. North Africa in winter is not desert. It is mud, thick and sucking, that can stop a tank in its tracks. The Germans learned this the hard way. Their vehicles, designed for European roads and Russian steppes, were heavy, and when the rains came, they sank. On January 18th, a panzer unit near Kasserine Pass found itself immobilized, their tanks stuck hub-deep in mud, unable to move forward or back. They called for recovery vehicles, and then they saw something that would be reported with disbelief all the way up the chain of command. An American jeep towing a 30-centimeter anti-tank gun drove past them on the same road. It did not sink. It did not slow. It simply drove through the mud as if it were pavement, the gun bouncing along behind it, and disappeared over the ridge. The German tank commander, Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt, radioed back to headquarters. Request clarification. American light vehicles appear unaffected by terrain that has disabled our panzers. How is this possible? The answer was engineering. The Jeep's four-wheel drive distributed power evenly across all wheels, giving it traction where two-wheel drive vehicles would spin uselessly. Its lightweight meant it did not sink as deeply into soft ground, and its short wheelbase allowed it to navigate obstacles, rocks, ditches, steep inclines that would stop larger vehicles. But more than the mechanics, it was the philosophy. The Jeep was designed not to dominate the battlefield, but to enable it. It was not a weapon, it was a tool. And the Americans had built 640,000 of them. By the spring of 1943, German intelligence officers were beginning to understand the implications. This was not a vehicle, this was a system, and the system was winning. The breakthrough moment came in Sicily in July 1943. The invasion was chaos, a multi-front amphibious assault across rugged, mountainous terrain. The Germans, dug into defensive positions, expected the Americans to struggle with logistics, to be slowed by the terrain, to exhaust their supply lines. And for the first few days it seemed that way. But then the Jeeps arrived, thousands of them, pouring off the landing craft, driving up roads, off-roads, through fields and riverbeds and mountain passes. They carried ammunition, water, radios, medical supplies, officers, engineers. They towed anti-tank guns into positions that the Germans had assumed were inaccessible. They evacuated wounded under fire, darting in and out of combat zones with a speed that made them nearly impossible to target. A German artillery officer, Oberleutnant Erich Hartmann, watched from a hilltop as a convoy of jeeps moved through a valley his guns had pre-targeted. He ordered fire. The shells landed, and the jeeps scattered like a school of fish, each one taking a different route, and within minutes they had regrouped on the other side and continued moving. Hartmann, frustrated and exhausted, wrote in a letter to his brother, "It is like fighting ghosts. You cannot pin them down. You cannot predict them. And there are so many." The Eastern Front veterans, transferred to Italy in late 1943, brought with them a sense of grim superiority. They had fought the Soviets. They had seen the worst the war could offer. The Americans, they assured their comrades, were soft, inexperienced, reliant on equipment rather than skill. And then they saw the Jeeps in action during the winter, fighting in the Apennines. The mountains of Italy in winter are brutal. Snow, ice, narrow roads that cling to cliffsides. German supply lines were stretched thin, reliant on horse-drawn carts and the occasional truck that could navigate the treacherous passes. The Americans used jeeps. They fitted them with chains, loaded them with supplies, and drove them up roads that the Germans had written off as impassable. In one documented incident near Monte Cassino, a German supply convoy was ambushed and destroyed on a mountain road. 2 days later, an American jeep, carrying a radio and 2 forward observers, drove up the same road, called in an artillery strike, and drove back down before the German response could even be organized. The German commander, General Major Friedrich von Senger, wrote in his post-war memoir, "We were fighting an enemy that could be everywhere at once." And the vehicle that made that possible was not their tank. It was that ridiculous little car, D-Day, June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy. The landings are chaos, but within hours the jeeps are rolling off the landing craft, driving through the surf, up the bluffs, into the hedgerows. A German Fallschirmjäger unit, defending a crossroads near Sainte-Mère-Église, watches as American forces consolidate faster than any intelligence estimate predicted. The reason is visible. Jeeps everywhere, moving constantly, carrying officers, supplies, radios, linking units, creating a web of communication and logistics that the Germans cannot disrupt. A captured German captain, interrogated by American intelligence in July, is asked what surprised him most about the invasion. He says without hesitation, "Your jeeps. We thought logistics would be your weakness. We thought we could cut your supply lines, isolate your units. But you do not have supply lines. You have 10,000 little vehicles that go anywhere, carry anything and never stop. How do you fight that? The interrogator has no answer, because the question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding. The Jeep was not designed to be fought. It was designed to be used. By the winter of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, the joke was over. German commanders, many of them veterans of the entire war, no longer mocked American equipment. They had learned, through bitter experience, that the Americans did not win because they were better soldiers. They won because they had built a logistical system so flexible, so resilient, that it could not be stopped. And at the heart of that system was a vehicle that weighed 2,400 pounds and cost $750 to produce. Vogel, the lieutenant who had laughed at the Jeep in Tunisia, was captured near Bastogne in January 1945. In his interrogation, he was asked about German perceptions of American equipment. He paused, then said, "In the beginning, we thought you were amateurs. You had no tradition, no discipline. Your equipment looked cheap, but we did not understand. Cheap does not mean weak. It means you can make more, and you did. You buried us in jeeps, in trucks and supplies, in everything. We fought with pride and tradition. You fought with production. And production won." The interrogator noted the comment and filed it. It would become one of the most quoted passages in post-war analyses of the conflict. The Jeep was produced in staggering numbers. Over 640,000 by war's end. It served in every theater, with every Allied nation. The British used it. The Soviets used it, receiving thousands through Lend-Lease. The Free French, the Poles, the Canadians all came to depend on it. And after the war, it became the template for an entire class of vehicles. Land Rover, Toyota Land Cruiser, the entire concept of the SUV, all of them trace their lineage back to the Willys MB. But the true legacy of the Jeep is not mechanical. It is philosophical. It proved that in modern warfare, mobility is power. That speed and flexibility can outweigh armor and firepower. That a cheap, simple, mass-produced tool, placed in the hands of millions of soldiers, can reshape the battlefield in ways that no single weapon system can. The Germans learned this lesson. But they learned it too late, and by the time they understood what they were facing, the little toy Jeep had already driven through the mud, over the mountains, across the rivers, and into history.